Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. From now on, there is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
This is a default impression of Ghana's Independence Day. The image of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah with his comrades of the Socialist Convention People's Party on the podium. Osagyefo declaring, "The battle has ended. Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever." To the left, Komla Bidima, Nathaniel Welbeck, and Archie Casey Hayford. To the right, Kojo Botio and Krobo Edusei. These images are so burned into our shared consciousness, they have practically lost the weight of their true significance. As the national anthem played officially for the first time, keen observers might notice a quick gesture as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah dabs his eyes with a hanky, overwhelmed with emotion. That simple gesture represents a glimpse into the true weight of the scenes we are witnessing from so many decades ago. You see, in spite of what we might think about our freedom today, independence of the first black African nation was a struggle. For 9 long years, sovereignty was fought over, postponed, and resisted. The greatest conflict in history, World War II, had ended. Soldiers from the Gold Coast had fought for the British Empire in Burma, going up against Imperial Japan and facing the full brunt of that bloody conflict. Now, 3 years later, many have only been paid a third of what they are owed by the colonial government. On 28 February 1948, 2,000 veterans marched on the Christiansborg Castle, the seat of colonial power located in Osu. They get to the crossroad leading to the castle. In front of them, a line of 12 policemen stand in their way. The police superintendent, Colin Imrie, orders his men to fire on the crowd of African veterans. His men do not respond. Imrie alone seizes a rifle from one of his men and fires 6 shots into the crowd, killing 3 people: Sergeant Cornelius Frederick Ajete, Private Odate Lamte, and Corporal Atipo. About 30 others are injured. The crowd quickly disperses. By nightfall, riots break out across Accra. Cars are overturned, British and foreign businesses are ransacked. By the following day, riots rage across the entire Gold Coast territories. The colonial government believes members of the political activist group, the United Gold Coast Convention, or UGCC, are responsible for the riots. Earlier in the month, the UGCC had organized a strike on goods brought in by the Association of West African Merchants, AWAM, who are European importers. The strike was meant to force the association to lower its exorbitant prices and break their monopoly. The term AWAM will become synonymous with cheating and profiteering. The riots coincide with the date the boycotts are to have ended. The 6 leaders of the UGCC are arrested and incarcerated together in the northern territories of the Gold Coast. On their arrest, they are captured in this famous picture. Kwame Nkrumah, the secretary of the UGCC, on the left, and the 5 founding members, Emmanuel Obechibi Lamte, Ebenezer Akua-Adjei, William Ofori-Atta, Joseph Boachi Dankwa, and Edward Akufo-Addo. The image captivates the imagination of the Gold Coast public. The 6 are seen as patriots in what starts to be considered a nationwide struggle for self-rule. Following a war touted by the Western Allies to have been fought for freedom of Europe under Nazi German, Italian, and Japanese imperialism, the very legitimacy of British colonial rule is now left in question. With the British now broke and desperate in its use of violence to squash expressions for self-rule in its colonies, these men become known by the public as the Big Six. What cannot readily be seen in this picture is a fundamental crack between them. The 5 founding members on one side and Kwame Nkrumah on the other, about exactly what independence represents. Nkrumah does not believe that any oppressor would willfully release their stranglehold on any colony. That in spite of the propaganda hammered home by the missionaries through Christian schools and the British government's arguments that a relationship is meant to usher what they see as backward societies into Western modernity, Colonialism is exclusively about exploiting the colony and all its resources for the benefit of Britain. Any development that arises in education and infrastructure is exclusively meant to facilitate the removal of that colony's natural resources. Nkrumah believes that only direct popular action, disruptive and persistent enough to make the African ungovernable under a united kingdom bankrupted by World War II, would force the issue of self-government. The other five in the Big Six are more about correspondence with the colonial government, negotiating with them and coming to an agreement amicably. This fundamental difference in view comes to a head once the six are incarcerated following the riots. In prison, the five blame Nkrumah for the boycott and its potential connection to the riots. In fact, on release, the UGCC demotes Kwame Nkrumah. On hearing this, the youth wing of the UGCC presses Kwame Nkrumah to break away from the organization and form his own party. The disturbances also gave leverage to the Labour Party in Britain over the conservative establishment, and they too pushed for greater African inclusion into governance. Under pressure, the colonial government forms the All-African Kuse Committee to prepare a report on how the country should be run. They invite 5 of the Big Six to join, all except for Kwame Nkrumah himself, who the British see as a troublemaker. The British prefer to share power with this group of moderate, educated elites who would ensure British colonial influence is maintained. With the committee still preparing its report, Kwame Nkrumah leads a massive breakaway movement from the UGCC. His new party is called the Convention People's Party, or CPP. In 1951, Kwame Nkrumah declares positive action, what is planned to be widespread peaceful protest and boycotts across the colony in order to bring the country to a halt and speed up the issue of independence. While it is meant to have been entirely peaceful, the scale of it means clashes cannot be avoided. 2 policemen are killed. The British response is to round up all the ringleaders. Nkrumah is incarcerated at James Fort, located at Jamestown in Accra. With under 6 months in the first election, the British expect the UGCC to have a clear run to victory. This would mean the partially African government will consist exclusively of moderate intellectual Africans the British can work with, rather than the uncompromising nationalist CPP. By a fortunate coincidence, just as Nkrumah is entering prison, one of his lieutenants, Komla Gbedema, is being released after 6 months behind bars. He immediately begins repairing the party that had been devastated by the arrest of much of his leadership following positive action. In February 1951, the elections are called, and Gbedema organizes the CPP campaign. The manner in which these campaigns are organized makes all the difference. Unlike the UGCC, whose intellectual elites cannot bring themselves to mingle too directly with the masses, Nkrumah's CPP do just that. Their grassroots members become known as the Veranda Boys, and their leaders are willing to sleep on the verandas with them, drink palm wines with them, sing songs to motivate them in solidarity everywhere they go. The public response to this is electrifying. In spite of still being behind bars, Nkrumah wins the 1951 election against his former UGCC colleagues, and the colonial government has the embarrassing task of releasing the leader of the newly formed partially African government from prison. There is surprisingly good harmony between the Africans and the British members of government. With a booming economy in cocoa, the CPP passes on the benefits by making free-for-all primary school education, doubling the school population within 3 years. Healthcare is rapidly extended across the colony, and a house building program is launched. Roads and harbour constructions begin in earnest. Within 3 years, the CPP has shown the British that Africans can run their own affairs. By 1954, the second Gold Coast election is announced. This one is meant to be the significant one. Whosoever wins this election would run an entire African government, and independence would soon follow. Several conservative oppositions form, united only in their shared distrust of the CPP. Despite this, the CPP wins 2/3 of the seats in government. Independence now seems inevitable. However, soon after that election, the Asante chiefs and cocoa farmers launched the National Liberation Movement. It seeks to keep the massive wealth of the Asantes from the national agenda. They push the issue of a federal system of government that they believe would secure their wealth, power, and traditions from an African central government in Accra. The chiefs of the Northern Territories also share the notion that the best form of government is a federal one. The Northern Territories are the least developed parts of the Gold Coast, and they do not trust the leadership of black men in the South. They believe the British would do a better job in developing their region than a government of fellow Africans. Clashes break out between strong armed gangs of the Asante arm of the NLM and the CPP, known as Action Groupers and Action Troopers. Today, we call such groups vigilante groups. Their goal is to intimidate the other side. Eventually, violence breaks out and the intimidation turns to actual killing. Even the colonial governor was seen with suspicion, and his motorcade is stoned by members of the NLM in Kumasi who believe he has become the mouthpiece for Nkrumah's central government. A bomb is set underneath CPP party headquarters. Fortunately, no one is injured. Unfortunately, between 1956 and 1966, this would only be the first of many attempts made on Nkrumah's life, meant to put an end to his national agenda. And in successive attempts, innocent lives would be lost. The existence of violence leads the colonial government to postpone the declaration of independence until a referendum is organized to settle the issue between the major parties. Will the Gold Coast become a nation state, as the CPP wants, or a federal state, as the NLM proposes? Whoever wins the referendum would be given a chance to form the government, NLM or the CPP. The NLM puts up a lively campaign, but lose. With a CPP victory in 1956, the NLM refuses to take their seats in the Legislative Assembly or even discuss independence. With a nation-state now a firm idea, Nkrumah pushes for a ban on parties that are based primarily on ethnicity or religion. The NLM quickly reorganizes itself into the United Party and would remain the key opposition until 1964, when another referendum changes the constitution to a single-party state. On September 18, 1956, Nkrumah announces that independence will take place in 6 months. The date chosen is the very same date on which 100 years earlier, Fante chiefs signed the Bond of 1844 with the British, the very first step in the British colony in the Gold Coast. The country would be named after a former empire that existed north of the Northern Territories, from which the first settlers in the Gold Coast are believed to have migrated from, the Ghana Empire. The name Ghana means warrior king, an apt title for what her leaders believe would someday be a continent-wide struggle for full independence and unity of the entire African continent. By 6th March 1957, there is so much confidence and so much to look forward to for the new nation. From all across the world, black activists came to see and be inspired in their own freedom struggles. The Black Star Nation would become a beacon for a ripple effect that would see one African nation after the other break free of colonial rule.
This decade is the decade of African independence.
Each would engage with their own bitter struggle, both with the colonial government unwilling to let go of their cash cow, and in violent disagreement, sometimes fatally, with an opposition unwilling to see a world beyond European dominance. It took 9 long years to finally achieve full independence in Ghana. From that fateful day on 28 February 1948 at the Crossroad, to Nkrumah and his CPP leadership on the podium at the Polo Court. By 1957, the first victory has been won. The struggle for true and full independence is only just beginning. Kwame Nkrumah and his generation pass on. Their contribution will forever be in the annals of African history. The road after them is long and tortuous, and there will be so many casualties in the struggle for African liberation, including Kwame Nkrumah himself. Even today, our independence struggle continues.
Forward then to independence now. Tomorrow, the United States of Africa.
Encouraged by some of our friends in England to watch the people he called reactionaries. And actually, talking to him, I got the impression that he was not going to be with us for long. For he regarded most of us as being reactionary.
I told them that when the chiefs of the Northern Territories entered into, treaties for protection with the British Crown, they understood it to mean not only protection from internal and external threats, but also a responsibility on the part of the British Crown to lead the people, to stand on their feet and be able to manage their own affairs.
They were prepared to sleep on verandas with the boys, popularly called veranda boys, because most of them were sleeping in verandas at the time. And when they went out to the villages, they trucked down together, sang their songs, drank palm wine in street bars, street corners with them, and virtually were prepared to throw their lot in with them at all times, at all places. Now this, Dankwa and others were not prepared to do. No, indeed, would they have been proved honest if they had attempted to do it, because it just didn't suit them. It wasn't in their character, it wasn't in their makeup, and they could not pretend to be with them in those directions without exposing their own hypocrisy.